Hey guys, FDV here, and welcome to how I would remake one of my favorite films of all time, King Kong, the Eighth Wonder of the World. There's not much I have to say for an intro, so let's just get into it. Our opening credits would be an homage to the original Kong, and as a throwback, we'd even throw in that fake Arabian proverb Marion C. Cooper made. But the film itself actually takes place in 1933. Now, I know that was one of people's complaints when Peter Jackson did his version, but I want my film to be a totally immersive experience, even when you're off Skull Island. Also, since it was a different time, the world still had so much mystery to it. With today's technology, you wouldn't take a voyage to Skull Island, no, you just fly over it. Not to mention, scientifically speaking, Skull Island probably would have sank by now. Plus, with today's modern weaponry, we'd probably be able to take on the creatures of Skull Island pretty easily. Anyway, back to the story. Carl Denham, played by Bruce Campbell, is a well-known filmmaker, adventurer, and risk-taker. He's most known for his pictures of animals, but he's also very renowned for his great World War I footage he filmed from a biplane flown by a good friend of his. Though recently, he hasn't been getting respect from the critics. The same old animal documentaries aren't doing it anymore. They want a good story. He has the adventure, but no action, and especially no romance. He plans to show the studio and critics what for by taking his signature style of real-life adventure and mix a tale of love and loss into it. This picture will be his great epic. For not only will this story be a grand tale of beauty and beast, but it will also be filmed at an island said to never be seen by civilized man. An island clouded in myth and legend, but not real fact. An old friend by the name of Nils Hellstrom gave him the map. Denham never heard from him again after that. Denham suspects either he went on with another adventure and forgot to write, or whoever he got the map from drove him out, or worse. Maybe the mob got involved. Either way, Denham has the map now, and he's not afraid to use it. He's already got a ship that'll take him there. And this time around, the ship's name is the Hunter. The Hunter is led by the stern Captain Englehorn, played by Sam Elliott. Denham got this gig because of his old friend Jack Driscoll, played by Nathan Fillion. Jack was the pilot who accompanied Denham on many of his World War I adventures. He's a gruff veteran who doesn't show many of his softer emotions. A friend from the film industry, Weston, comes to visit Denham on the Hunter to inform him that due to his reckless reputation and how secretive he's been about this project, no talent agent in the city is quite willing to get him an actress. Denham takes it upon himself to find a leading lady for his picture, even if he has to marry one, and he takes to the streets. No one in the city seems to fit his likings, and he'll be damned if he chooses a flapper. Ironically enough, a flapper house is the last place he stops at before giving up, and he makes his way back to the ship. On his way back, he's bummed out, but luck strikes as he sees a woman getting harassed and accused for being a stealer. He has no tolerance for that kind of shit. Can't he just see she's a lady trying not to starve, he thinks to himself? But something in him springs him into action, and he shoos the guy off by giving him a buck. Denham hands the girl the apple she was eyeing and planned to steal, but never actually did. The woman's face is obscured by the shadows and her hat. But when Denham finally gets a good look at her, he knows he's found the one. Her eyes are beautiful and blue. Her hair is so golden it makes the sun jealous. Her facial expression makes her seem fragile yet hardened. Denham hails a taxi and offers for her to come with. He'll get her some real food. She accepts, and they go to a coffee shop/diner. There we are finally given info on this mysterious young lady. Her name is Ann Darrow, played by Margot Robbie. She's a country girl who moved to the city to pursue acting but only ended up in a cheap vaudeville act. Not that she's complaining, she loves the show and everyone in it, but it just doesn't pay the bills, and deep down she craves something greater. She's in luck since Denham reveals who he is and that he's interested in her to be the lead in his next picture. Denham's face lights up when he hears that she actually has acting experience. Cheap or not, she's still got experience. He also asks if she's afraid to work with animals. She says no. He asks if she's had any experience with animals other than dogs and cats, more exotic creatures. She tells a story of how she shot a snake back at the old family farm. Anne is a bit skeptical, but Denham manages to convince her to come with. She asks him what does she have to do, to which Denham simply replies, just trust me and keep your chin up. She comes aboard the Hunter, and on this ship we have Captain Englehorn, of course, Denham and Jack, but we also have Charlie, played by Donnie Yen. He's a Chinese cook with a sarcastic sense of humor. He also has a pet monkey named Iggy. Also on the ship is his partner, Old Lumpy, another gruff and badass cook. He can be played by anyone from Kurt Russell to Harrison Ford to Denzel Washington, just anyone who could play a grizzled and aged ass kicker. Lumpy is a father figure to our next character, a young stowaway named Billy, played by Logan Lerman. Now I know what you're thinking if you know me. Frank, you roast Perks of Being a Wallflower all the time. Why would you pick the dude who played Charlie? Well, because I never said the acting in the movie was bad. That movie has class acts like Ezra Miller and Emma Watson. The problem with Perks is that it's just so depressing. At least with Peter Jackson's King Kong, yeah, I'm crying at the end, but it's more of a beautiful sadness, and at least there was a fun adventure beforehand as opposed to I Wanna Fucking Die the movie. But the one thing Perks proved is that Lerman has the acting chops to channel the emotions I want him to. Since Billy is the youngest of the crew, what happens on the island is going to hit him the hardest. Plus, he just has that look I'm searching for, you know what I mean? He just looks much younger than he really is, and honestly, how many times can I cast Dane DeHaan in these fan film ideas? I mean, seriously. Just trying to shake things up by adding new people. During the trip, Anne has to fight for her respect. Englehorn and Denham are nice to her, and Iggy takes a liking to her, but Jack is a little unsure about having a woman on the ship. Yes, I know it's messed up and that it isn't right, but you also have to put the time period into consideration. Aside from just being the norm at the time, this will add depth to Jack's character as the movie goes on. At first, he's rude and dismissing of her. He feels she's a nuisance, nothing but a bother. But as time goes on, they manage to find similarities with each other, and she manages to speak to his soul and break his cold, hard disguise. The reason he's so cold is because he has PTSD from World War I, which was arguably one of the most brutal wars in our history, and he saw many people he cared about die, so he pretty much isolated himself emotionally until now. He's scared for her because they don't know exactly where they're going, and he's scared of her because she's just so smart, so perfect, and so strong. She's unlike any girl he's ever met. As the voyage progresses, they end up falling in love and spending the night in Anne's cabin. Other ship scenes include Denham filming Anne and her screaming for the first time and all that jazz. Denham wanting her to scream for her life makes Jack concerned about what he expects Anne to really see. Later, Jack voices his concern for Anne in the secrecy to Denham, and Denham accuses him of going soft and goes into a theme song, teasing him a bit until he breaks and admits he'll finally spill the beans later that day, which he does. Jack, Skipper, and Weston knew they were heading to an uncharted island, but now he's letting everyone else know, including Anne. It's an island said to be off the coast of Sumatra, Indonesia, which is where he originally told Anne they were going. And that they'll know they're there due to a huge mountain oddly enough in the shape of a skull. Skipper says if the map is correct, they'll be there shortly. This is also where Denham asks about Kong and that he'd love to get him on film and add him to the movie. It'd be a smash hit in the box office. According to his old friend Hellstrom, Kong is said to be neither beast nor man, but to the primitive natives he is God. But this is all hearsay. Englehorn says for his sake he better be right. Obviously, if there's nothing, it would be a huge waste of everyone's time, but later the ship begins shallowing, and a thick fog rolls in. They can't see anything, but there's obviously land ahead, and the shallowing gets more and more frequent. Out of the fog, the sun begins to rise, and they see a beach, and above the beach, a wall. And above that wall, slightly off to the left, is a mountain. A mountain in the shape of a skull. They've made it. Denham wants to go ashore with his casting camera, but Driscoll is a little hesitant to let Anne go along since this is their first time going on the island and they don't know if it's safe or not. But Denham doesn't have it. He protests that he's running the show and he's learned from experience to keep his camera and cast on deck at all times. Needless to say, Denham wins and they head ashore. Denham, Anne, Driscoll, Skipper, and some other crew members including Billy who sneaks his way into the group. The place looks marvelous from the beach as the sun shines hard on them. They continue upwards into the village towards the wall. As they come closer, the sound of drums and chanting starts to be heard in the distance. They all start to move slower to remain undetected, Denham taking the lead. The chants heard are calls for Kong. They hide behind a shrub and Denham takes a look over and sees a celebration going on with a ton of natives, who in this movie are played by actors and actresses of all kinds of different races, including Hawaiian, African, Asian, and Native American. And of course Indonesian. Denim is amazed by the show, and Anne is eager to see, but Jack holds her back. She plays with him a bit since he's this big, strong sailor, yet he's too afraid to see the show. They have a quick bit of fun and almost Han and Leia-esque verbal sparring until Denim tells them to quiet down, and for someone to pass him his camera. He sneaks himself out of the bush slowly, sets up his tripod, and begins rolling. But in the distance, the witch doctor notices them and quietly informs the tribe leader, who calls them out. Everything goes silent and Denim knows the jig is up. He goes still and puts his hands up. He lets the crew know that they see them, and Billy tries to hightail it out of there, but once again, Jack holds him back, wondering where he's running off to. Denim tells the rest of the crew to put their hands up. The tribe leader walks down to them and speaks to them in a language Denim is unfamiliar with, but the skipper might understand. Englehorn says the language sounds like a more primitive version of what the Nias Islanders speak. That means you could get through to them, Denim deduces. I'll try, Englehorn responds. The native leader has a booming voice and he seems angry. He wonders what is the meaning of this intrusion. Skipper tells Denim this, and Denim tells Englehorn to tell the leader that they don't mean to intrude and that they come in peace. Skipper does this, and the leader seems silent for a second, as he sighs intimidatingly and tilts his head back in a commanding way. That's when Denim notices a woman up at an altar by the wall, with many necklaces of flowers around her neck and a headband of flowers around her head. Denim asks what this celebration is for, and Skipper relays the message. But the leader corrects that there's no celebration going on here, but instead a sacrifice. She is the wife of Kong. When Kong is pleased, life is peaceful. When Kong is not, life is horror. So we see that the natives are just as much victims of Kong's might as anyone else. They aren't inhuman beasts. They do have guilt, but they have to do it to save the rest of the tribe. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That's when the witch doctor steps in, and he is hysterical. Englehorn translates that the ritual has been spoiled by them seeing it. Kong will be displeased. They will all feel Kong's wrath. The murmured voices of the villagers turn into frightened gasps as the tribe leader becomes more enraged. He wonders how they can fix the problem. That's when the witch doctor notices something shining. Something bright and reflecting off the sun. It's Anne's hair. They've never seen a blonde before. She looks heavenly. The witch doctor gives the leader's attention to the golden-haired woman and tells him that the ritual could still be saved. Kong would definitely be pleased with her, and perhaps this will get rid of him for good, or at least a longer time than usual. The leader gets grim and tells them he would like the golden-haired girl to give to Kong, and in return for their loss, they'll give them 6 of their women. I know, it's screwed up, but 1930s people and ancient tribe people. Not very progressive people. Denim says no deal, but they'll be back to make friends in the morning with other tidings they hope will make up for it. They all turn around, and Denim tips his hat to them and whistles a friendly tune to disguise the tension they're all feeling. Back on the ship later that night, Denim and Englehorn wonder what they can give to the natives. Englehorn reveals he's done some shady business with the black market, and they can give them weaponry to fight off whatever it is they fear, including that Kong fella. But not before I get to film the son of a bitch, Denim passionately responds as they both smoke from pipes. Sure, whatever you say, Carl, Englehorn says. What's the matter, chap? Carl asks, noticing the stern look of deep thought on his face. We don't belong here, Englehorn replies, looking down at the map. Something's up. Ah, don't be so paranoid. We just got here, and I didn't travel all these miles on your stinking ship to give up now. What's troubling you? Englehorn blows smoke and looks up at Carl. Well, if you hadn't noticed, they offered to trade 6 gals to get Anne. What, you mean those savages? Come on, Skipper, I'm sure everything will be fine once we give them some other goodies. I bet they'll lose their minds once they use a rifle for the first time. Or maybe we can give them tobacco or whiskey. They ain't savages. They're smarter than you think. They got a system, and whatever we did, we messed up that system. He points his finger towards the island. Look, I don't know what that Kong thing is. All I've heard is rumor. But it's clear that they fear him more than life itself. And when they saw Anne, they saw a possible permanent solution to their problem. And we denied them salvation. Do you really think some tobacco or whiskey is really going to make up for that? Denim hesitates. Well, no. You don't know. Maybe guns will give them confidence. Like you said, they can fight him off. Or maybe it's you who doesn't know. For all I know, that Kong creature can take bullets like they're nothing. All I know is that something doesn't seem right since we got here. The sound of drums bellow in the distance. You hear that, don't you? He asks Denham as Denham looks out the window towards the wall and sees the orange glow of flames. Their twisted ceremony is still going on. While Denham and Englehorn talk, we see Billy talking to Old Lumpy and expanding their relationship while we cut to Jack and Ann talking on deck. They're talking about what happened today, and Jack admits he was more afraid than Ann. Jack is called by another sailor, and he tells Ann he'll be right back. Meanwhile, a team of natives make their way towards the ship in a canoe. They climb aboard and take Ann, but in a struggle, Ann breaks off the necklace of one of the natives. We can hear one of the natives frantically whisper the same phrase in his native tongue into Ann's ear. And when translated, what he's saying is, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Showing that they don't like what they're doing, they just feel like they have to. Charlie ends up finding the necklace on deck and alerts the crew that the natives have been aboard. This startles Jack and he immediately rushes to Ann's cabin. She's not there. The drums on the island seem to get louder and louder as he looks out to the island and knows what they have to do. The crew gears up with as much guns and ammo as they can carry. Denham is also carrying smoke bombs, which had the crew scratching their head before, but now the more firepower the better. He gets Billy to hold the big box of them. And now Old Lumpy and Charlie are going to the island since they've had experience with weapons. They have rifles, shotguns, pistols, knives, and even Tommy guns hidden under the lower quarters. Squads fill up the lifeboats and head ashore. Denham brings the camera. Jack scowls. Meanwhile, Ann is being dragged by two natives, her feet scraping on the floor. Every time she fights back, their grip gets stronger as they drag her through the village and is showered in rice, flowers, and other natural resources by onlookers. The witch doctor anoints her with ashes on her head. Gates on the wall open, revealing a staircase and an altar with two pillars, and behind it, darkness with the shape of never-ending jungle. Who knows what's behind it? They walk her up and tie her hands to the pillars and quickly run back and close the gates. From there, everyone goes silent as the tribal leader goes on with the ritual and says an ancient prayer of sacrifice to Kong. And after every verse, he signals the men next to him to bang a gong and strike a wooden pillar with holes in it that makes a very hollow and echoey smacking sound. It's almost as if it's a dinner bell. The natives all wait there in silence as a sound of branches splintering in the distance grows louder and louder, and deep animalistic breathing and growls get made out. The two trees in front of the altar get pushed out of the way by giant dark gray hands with black fur behind them. And out of the darkness, eyes open and a monster roars. Ann screams in shock and terror as she looks upon the giant face of Kong. And Kong examines her. He's never seen a human being like her, and he pokes her lightly for a second, which makes her swing on the pillars. He looks up at the cheering natives, snarls, then looks back down and undoes the ropes on the altar. Ann faints and falls right into Kong's hand. He looks up and roars at the natives, swatting a hand at them before he runs off into the jungle. Meanwhile, Denham and the crew show up just in time to hear Kong roar. That sound lingers in Carl's mind, and he knows they have to follow it. The village people retreat to their homes. They've never seen a gun or heard the sound of gunshots before, so their survival instincts kick in and they flee. They manage to get the gates open as they split into two teams. Team 1 consists of Jack, Denham, Charlie, Old Lumpy, Billy, and a platoon of sailors. Team 2, on the other hand, consists of Englehorn and a whole nother squad of sailors. Team 1 gathers up guns, ammo, water, and food. They walk into the jungle. It seems to go on forever. They hear Kong in the distance, trees falling, Kong grunting, etc. They try calling Ann's name with no response. Denham leads the group. The floor is muddy and moist. As they walk further, looking dead ahead, Billy trips on something, as the box of gas bombs held on by a strap around him goes down like an anvil. "Hey, careful with those gas bombs, kid," Denham shouts before realizing what he tripped on. It's a crater of sorts. But when they all examine it, they realize it's a footprint. A huge footprint. They instantly know it's the footprint of what took Ann. Denham knows it's Kong. They all take a second to marvel at it. "Good lord, he must be as big as a house," Denham excitedly says, holding onto his hat. Ann regains consciousness in Kong's arm, and as Kong continues to move, she shakes and thrashes all around. She yells whoa, then screams again as Kong lets out another roar. He pounds his chest with his other hand and thrashes her about. They all hear this back at the footprint, and Jack yells, "Ann!" as he runs off ahead of the rest. Denham follows second with his camera. Jack continues to run. Anne is the only thing on his mind, and he doesn't have time to stop. That is until a shape lumbers in the distance coming in from the left. It's a weirdly scaly beast with spikes going all across its back and a tail that wags hungrily. It's a Stegosaurus. The rest of the team follows and calls for Jack and then stops at the sight of the beast, but the damage is done as the Stegosaurus hears them and looks up at them. It looks back down and begins gnawing on a plant, and Denham smiles with a relieved sigh and nudges Jack. "Well, at least it isn't a man-eater," he laughs, "but just because it's not a carnivore doesn't mean it won't defend itself when it feels threatened." It looks back up and lets out a warning roar, before turning around and charging at them. They all freeze as the raging dinosaur charges like a bull. Denham, in this shocked, wide-eyed state, nudges Billy without even looking behind him and asks for a smoke bomb, as he waves his hand demandingly. Billy supplies him with one, and as he throws it, he commands the sailors to open fire. They all begin shooting it, and the Stegosaur staggers as it's never felt a sensation like this before. Then out of nowhere, the smoke bomb explodes right on its face as it spins around in a circle as the smoke blinds it, and shards of shrapnel scratch its face. It falls down, writhing in a painful frenzy as the sailors take a sigh of relief and start moving forward. But as the Stegosaurus rolls and kicks its legs in pain, it manages to get itself back up, and the sailors all jump back and open fire once more, before the beast finally lays back down, and Lumpy gives the final blow to its eye as it shrieks and blood drips down the now black hole of an eye like a tear, and they continue to walk as the creature lifts its tail up and down in its final death throes. They keep on walking when they come across a large body of water, a swamp. It's very foggy, but they can hear splashing in the distance. They know it's Kong. Together they build a raft and make their way across. Giant swamp flies come down and bite, but they swat them off and kill them. Lumpy provides some comedic relief in the scene as most of the flies attack him. But something's in the water. It's like a miniature megalodon. Not quite as big as the original megalodon, but bigger than a great white shark. It bashes up against them, and they proceed to fall into the water. And if that's not bad enough, a Brontosaurus lurks its head up and starts picking out the fleeing sailors and flinging them like ragdolls from above, while the mini-megalodon takes people from below. The heavy box of smoke bombs weigh Billy down as he goes all the way to the bottom like a rock and almost drowns before Lumpy comes and cuts him loose, leaving the gas bombs behind. Their guns are also useless now, but they must keep moving. Denham keeps his camera up on the remains of the raft and kicks himself to shore. The survivors all begin to run as the Bronto chases one into a tree and attacks him, but doesn't swallow him since Brontos are herbivores. While the swamp scene is going on, Kong makes his way to a log bridge. Before he can make it to the bridge, two beasts approach him from each side. On one side, a Styracosaurus. On the other side, the mysterious Arsinotherium, a two-horned menace that comes charging like a rhino, which startles the Styracosaur and makes it charge as well. Below Kong, he is standing on black slabs of prehistoric asphalt, and we see the wheels in his head turn. He puts Anne down atop a tar-like mountain and lets the beasts come. He jumps, and the two monsters bash each other's heads like feuding deer. Kong comes back down on both of their heads. He closes his hand-like feet on them before they jerk their heads up and trip him down. The Arsinotherium thrusts its head down, attempting to gut Kong. Kong rolls over and puts the Styracosaur in a headlock. The Arsinotherium gets its horns stuck in the asphalt as it tries to tug itself out. While wrestling with the Styracosaurus, Kong kicks the Arsinotherium in the neck once, and its neck breaks as it closes its eyes and its head goes limp, stuck there in the floor. Kong kicks its lifeless corpse for the second time, and its horns shatter off its head, leaving two broken stumps with black holes in the center of its head and two stumps stuck in the floor. Its body falls over to the side. Kong then shoves off the Styracosaur and bangs his chest as he gets himself up on two, picks up a loose piece of asphalt and slams it down on the Styracosaur's head, injuring it. It shakes its head and runs off. Kong looks up at the top of the rock to see that Anne is gone. Cut to her running through the jungle, her feet getting cut on any sharp object on the ground. Her once beautiful hair now dirtied. She ends up tripping and finding herself in quicksand. She begins to panic, but remembers that only makes the sinking worse, so she freezes and keeps her hands up. And her chin up. Ba-dum-tss. In the distance, trees are uprooted and the rumbling of feet makes her sink faster as she gasps. Just then, Kong comes from out of the jungle and he looks down and stares at Anne. Disappointed and a little mad at her. But Anna's in such a desperate situation, she'd take any help she can get. And her big blue eyes shriek with empathy. And in Kong's eyes, you could see heartbreak at the fact that she fled. In this moment of staring, something clicks between them, and when Kong picks her up out of the sand and wipes her off softly, Anne starts to see another side to him. They make their way to the log bridge. Back with the sailors, they are now gunless and frightened, running away from the beings they encountered back at the swamp. But luck is sparse, and just when they thought they were far enough away, they run into a familiar beast, the Styracosaur from before. Its head is bloody and clearly injured, which only makes it angry, and when a bunch of sailors find it and jump back, screaming, the dinosaur lets out a cheer while lifting its stubby front legs and charges once more. It tramples one sailor and impales another before chasing after the rest who took that opportunity to run. Our main guys make it to the bridge and have no choice but to cross. They try not to look down because the chasm below holds the most horrid part of the island. The sound of their screams attract Kong, who puts Anne up onto a tree and runs back. When Kong roars his way out, their first instinct is to turn back, but when they do, there's a Styracosaurus waiting for them. Denim is in the back just filming Kong before Kong starts lifting up the log, which hits the Styracosaur in the face and angers it more as it starts to shove the other side. Some sailors fall off and die on impact. Others stay alive due to the muddy bottom. And that's when the most terrifying hellspawn reveal themselves and start a feeding frenzy. When the first corpse falls, a giant spider-like being crawls off a rock. When the second falls and lives, he thinks he can run to a rock, but the rock is actually another crab-like spider creature, and another comes out of a cave. Denim's biggest tragedy happens when the camera leaps from his hands and falls into the pit, leaving him looking down like he just lost a brother or a wife. Just then, Charlie falls, and as a result of trying to catch him, Old Lumpy follows, but Billy takes his hand but can't pull him up, and another shake from Kong loosens Billy's grip as he watches his best friend and father figure plummet to his death. He can't contain himself as Denim snaps himself out of his selfish malaise and takes Billy. They sneak into a cavern next to the log. They climbed over and ducked. And Jack, on the other side, climbs down a vine and hides in another cavern. Kong flips over the log, and the rest of the sailors fall. This is when the Lost Spider Pit sequence is truly redone. Lumpy is surrounded by tiny spider creatures who eat him alive. A lizard pig creature eats away at another sailor's midsection, and a tentacle beast disgustingly devours a man. Charlie and other sailors are destroyed by giant hopping sprickets. On the top of the crevice, Kong and the Styracosaurus bellow at each other, but never touch. Kong punching a fist onto the ground as challenge, tempting the dinosaur to leap over. Back in the pit, some of the sailors grab sticks and other melee weapons like their knives to defend themselves, but they all fall. One lizard climbs up from the pit and attempts to attack the hiding Jack. It must have smelled him. Jack quickly cuts the vine it's climbing on, and it falls back into the horrible war zone/feeding ground that is the pit that Jack had no choice but to witness from a bird's eye view. The clattering of the reptilian creature falling sends Kong's focus in Jack's direction. He looks over but can't see into the cavern. He can only see the insects eating in the murky depths, so he reaches his hand down and tries to feel for something. Jack falls back, and you can see the wheels in both of their heads turning. Across the ravine, Carl seems frozen in an angry shock, just staring down into the pit, knowing he can't get his camera back, and it was virtually all for nothing. It's a half-selfish, half-guilty reason. On the one hand, his film won't get made. On the other hand, he is responsible for the deaths of all these sailors, and nothing of value will come out of it. Billy is in the corner crying his eyes out, covering his mouth so he won't make a sound. Just a few whimpers and gasps escape him. The Styracosaurus looks down, hearing the whimper, but can't reach, and doesn't see anything. It eventually gets bored, scowls at the curious Kong, thinking he's dumb for trying to reach for Jack, and walks off. Carl looks up and his facial expression changes. He is concerned for Jack, but at the same time he's observing Kong. This mythical being with so much mystery behind it turned out to be a giant fucking ape. But maybe it can't be a waste. He's still a wondrous being that people would love to see. Jack unsheaths his knife and lifts it. When the hand comes down for him, he stabs at it a couple of times, his nerves getting to him, and Kong jumps back. To him, it must feel like a bee sting, but he notices the cuts and blood on his hand and pouts a bit. But he tries again. Now he's dead set on getting this guy, but Jack stabs him again, and he pulls back once more, and shakes his hand to ease the pain. He then roars in a rage and shakes his head while holding on to the edge of the ravine, and shakes himself like a wrestler testing the ropes. Back with Anne in the tree, she sees a flock of prehistoric birds or pterodactyls flying away from something, and a curious horror takes hold of her. In the distance, a lumbering creature walks into view. Her eyes go wide when she notices it's a T-Rex. It's not looking at her as it scratches its head with its stubby arm before noticing a weird yellow blur in the tree to its left, and it turns and stares at her. Her eyes widen even more, and the scene where Carl directed her to scream comes full circle, because as this T-Rex processes this more and more, so does she. And her eyes go wider and wider as she looks up at it. She's amazed and horrified, and helpless. But maybe if she can scream, someone or something could help her. She'll take anything. She looks around the tree she's in and tries to find a weapon to defend herself, but finds nothing but a nest with prehistoric eggs in it. One hatches and reveals a baby pterodactyl. It's slimy, and out of instinct, she lets out a little shriek, jumps back, and flips the nest out of the tree, and sadly, the baby and other eggs fall to their deaths. But that sudden move motivates the T-Rex more as it speeds up its walk. Now she registers as prey. Although her lungs seem paralyzed, she throws her arms around her eyes and screams for her life. Back at the ravine, they all hear this, but Kong is the only one able to act on it. He looks back and forth from the ravine to where the scream came from, back to the ravine. He roars at it as if to say, "This isn't over," and runs back to Anne. The T-Rex stomps up to Anne, opening its mouth, and that's when Kong jumps in and slugs it in the face. Its head goes all the way to the ground, and its ass and tail goes up. It then adapts and swings its tail around and whips Kong in the face, leaving a scar. It proceeds to bite Kong's leg, which trips him. The T-Rex lifts itself back up and waves its tail on the floor back and forth like a snake for intimidation. Kong looks up at Anne, and Anne is watching in a horrified awe. The sight of her motivates him to get back up, and in response to the tail wag, he retorts with a pound to his chest and a wave of his hands towards himself, as if saying to come on and have a go if the Rex thinks it's hard enough. The T-Rex slinks its tail on the floor trying to trip Kong again, but Kong jumps and stomps on the tail. Kong lifts his fists like a boxer. The T-Rex whips its tail back, and you could see their primal heads thinking of a strategy. As Kong slowly sets up his punch, he reaches his fist over, and the T-Rex snaps at Kong each time with its teeth. Kong shoots his hand back each time before finally going in for it and socking the T-Rex in the face with a right hook. The T-Rex goes down and attacks Kong's left arm, sinking its teeth into his furry bicep. Kong screams as they begin to grapple. Kong's long arms and the T-Rex's stubby claws push at each other until they both push each other off, and Kong accidentally falls into the tree that Anne is in. The tree falls over as Anne screams, and much like Triple H at WrestleMania 33, that makes Kong mad. And speaking of wrestling, Kong tries a new tactic. First, he rips a small tree from its roots and tries to shove it down the Rex's throat, but it kicks Kong off and repositions itself. Kong recovers and runs up the Rex's tail onto its back. He gives it a few punches before putting it in a chokehold. Anne's legs are stuck under the tree, and she is now next to the remains of the pterodactyl nest, which is a gross mess of fluids to say the least. The roars these animals make are ungodly loud, and she has no choice but to cover her ears. Kong tries to keep the T-Rex's mouth shut like a muzzle, but it breaks free, so Kong goes to the other extreme. He begins to pull the Rex's mouth open. It clamps back down a couple of times and bites Kong's finger. He does the shaking hand motion he did with Jack earlier to ease the pain. Once he's ready, he plunges his hand into the T-Rex's mouth again.
He begins to pry the Rex's mouth open as the dinosaur's roar changes to a high-pitched roar that's more in pain as you hear its jaw begin to snap. You even see the strips of flesh and muscle connecting the jawbone together beginning to stretch past its limit and snap. Kong is so into it he can't keep balance and he slips off onto the floor, bringing the Rex down with him. But Kong adjusts and flips the Rex around and gets on top of it. Kong is now standing, and although the Rex is fighting, it's no use as Kong finally tears its jaw open, blood leaking out. He finishes it off by crushing its dislocated top jaw. With a crunch, it's over, but although Kong is a giant terror gorilla, he's not that bright, and he begins to play with the dead body like a little monkey or a child. Opening and closing the jaw and shaking at it, dropping it on the floor and wondering why it won't get up, or perhaps making sure it's down for the count like a prehistoric referee. When he realizes it's dead, pride takes over him as he begins to bang his chest and roar before ending it with a kingly pound of both fists on his chest twice. Anne is astounded by this, not quite frightened of Kong anymore, more fascinated with him. Kong looks around for Anne and sees she's stuck under the tree. He walks up to her and smiles as he lifts the tree up like it was a toothpick, and instead of picking her up like a human ragdoll, he puts an open palm out to her, giving her the option to come with her. And oddly enough, she does. Something registers with her that she is probably under the protection of the most deadly creature on the island, an unbeatable force of nature, the eighth wonder of the world. Plus, if she didn't accept, Kong is still an animal, so he'd probably just take her anyway. They walk off together and roam further into the jungle, with a new understanding for each other growing. When the coast is clear, Jack, Carl, and Billy crawl out of their caves back to land. Billy falls and grips the grass, glad to feel solid land, then rips the grass out of the dirt by its roots out of emotion. Carl picks him up sternly and looks over to Jack. "What are you gonna do?" Carl asks. Jack pauses, but he knows exactly what he's gonna do. "I'm going after him and getting Anne back," Jack says confidently. Carl nods. "Right. I'll tell Englehorn to wait until you return, but I don't know how long he'll allow it. So make it fast, and Godspeed." "I'll try." "Thanks," Jack answers. They both begin to walk off, but then Carl turns around and adds, "Hey, Jack." Jack stops and turns around. "Yeah? When you bring back Anne, bring the big guy with you." "What?" Jack asks, confused. "You heard me," Carl says as he walks off, Billy in front of him, head down. Carl wonders what he's even thinking. It doesn't matter what Jack does. The moment Kong knows Anne is gone, he'll chase after her. There's no way to avoid it. But when Kong comes, they'll be ready. Not far into Jack's trek, he finds the corpse of the T-Rex. Bubbling blood coming from its mouth as a distraught mother pterodactyl picks from it, not only eating, but looking for any remnants of its eggs, hoping something might have survived. When it sees Jack, an angry look comes on its face, and it begins to fly at him. Jack tears a sharp branch off a tree and hurtles it at the flying creature. It impales its wing as it floats down and twitches and spasms in pain. Jack walks up to it and grips the spear in its wing. As he pulls it out, he uses the force of his pull to stomp his leg down onto the creature's neck, putting it out of its misery. He continues to walk towards the Rex carcass, and to make it through, he has no choice but to step into its blood-filled mouth. A horrible stench seems to be steaming out of it as Jack holds his breath and walks through the tar-like blood that soaks his boots and the bottom of his jeans. When he finally steps out, he throws up, then keeps moving. He's hot on Kong's trail as we cut back and forth from Kong and Anne's perspective to Jack's. The landscape becomes less jungle and more rocky as Kong journeys further to his home, a cave on the highest mountain of Skull Island's peak. Kong takes a break in a cave not too far from his room, if you will. This cave has a few rock formations, bubbling tar pits, and skeletons of long-dead members of the family of a species known today as Megaprimatus Kong. This place also resembles the geographical landscape of Gaul Spaceport from the game Shadows of the Empire. Kong puts Anne down atop a mountain-like rock formation, much like before when he fought the Styracosaurus and the Arsinotherium. Below, Jack sneaks up, but as Kong turns and bends down,
Jack hides further behind the large jagged rock formation he entered behind. The reason why Kong turned and bent over is because he noticed in all the beige and black, a tiny bright flower had grown. He bends down and, with pinky out, picks it as delicately as he could and brings it up to his nose to sniff it, and it's obvious he plans to give it to Anne. But as he's picking the flower, from out of the tar slithers a giant plesiosaur that slunks its way up the rock formation towards Anne. When Anne notices this, she puts her back to the wall and screams. She then looks down and notices a bone from one of the dead Kongs and picks it up and starts swinging at the plesiosaur. But from the moment Anne screamed, Kong was broken from his trance as he looks up, sees the danger, and drops that flower in the tar. We get a shot of Jack peeking out from behind the rock and noticing the flower sink into the inky blackness. Kong grabs the plesiosaur, which begins lightly smacking his pecs with its flippers and wrapping the rest of its long body around him. The plesiosaur tightens its grip and Kong tries desperately to tug and pry it off. The slimy beast even takes a bite out of Kong's neck, and that jolts him to tug even harder, and he eventually gets it off and begins to smash it up against the hard, jagged rocks. To finish it off, Kong wrings it and twists its body like a wet towel, liquefying its organs before going limp. Once again, Kong plays with the corpse of his enemy, this time flopping the body around like some sort of slinky before finally tossing it back into the tar, which begins to absorb the dead aquatic creature, and once again we get a shot of Jack watching it sink. He doesn't know what to make of Kong. Back at the wall, Denim and Billy have made it back, and the moment Billy sees Englehorn, he tries to fight back tears, but ends up clinging to him and crying. Englehorn's initial instinct is to push him off, but he's known Billy for so long and knew this was no place for him, and whatever he experienced will stick with him for the rest of his life, so he lets him cry. He asks Denim where the rest of them are. Dead. Except for two, Denim says, walking past Englehorn. He then turns and points his finger at him. But when they return, they won't be alone. At the top of the Rocky Mountain, Kong sits at his throne, if you will, watching the sunset with Anne, and when it starts to get dark, a fog rolls in. Anne is sitting slightly behind Kong, just observing him. Kong is looking at one of the bones of one of his fellow band members that he used to travel together with. Maybe a sibling, parent, or child. All that's clear is that Kong may just be the last of his kind. We can see this sink in Kong's facial expression. We never get a flashback or see what actually happened to the Kong species, but in a moment paying homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey, Kong takes the bone and weaves it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, getting more and more aggressive as his eyes become more watered, and it begins to rain. He lets out a pain-filled roar before throwing the bone in the air and banging his chest as lightning strikes. This can also be a throwback to Hulk Gray. Anne stares up at him with pity as he shakes his head and solemnly walks back into his cave. That's when he notices a rock falling in his peripheral vision, and he goes to look. It's Jack continuing to make his way towards Anne, and now he's stuck behind a rock. If he moves, Kong will see him, and all Kong could do is reach around with his big hand and catch him. He's screwed. Before Kong can do anything, we cut back to Anne just sitting there in the rain, thinking, processing all that's gone on in such a short time. But all of a sudden, a pack of tremendously large eagles come flying onto the ledge, and she once again screams, as one picks her up in its giant talons. Kong leaps into action as he begins to fight off these war eagles. That's right, the original had a pterodactyl, the '05 remake had those bat creatures. Here, I'm giving a shout out to one of Kong animator Willis O'Brien's unmade films, War Eagle, which was an amazing concept back then, and is still amazing now. Kong fights off the eagles swarming around him, which is foreshadowing for the climax of the film. The main eagle loosens his grip, and Anne falls back onto the mountain, further back towards the cave. Jack realizes Kong is distracted and swoops in. He grabs Anne from behind, and she's surprised to see him. "We gotta go. Now!" Jack says, picking her up as they run for the edge of the mountain. The edge has a huge rope-like vine that goes downward. The reason they didn't just go back the way they came is because Kong is stomping all around, and at that moment, he had moved back towards the cave, and if they tried to run that way, they'd be accidentally crushed. Kong takes one of the eagles and rips its wing off and throws it to the side, as it falls down like a butterfly with a broken wing, or a fighter jet succumbing to air and gravity. It's now pouring on them as lightning strikes more and more and thunder rolls. After the eagles retreat, Kong notices that Anne isn't anywhere to be found until he notices the rope-like vine jiggling and moving and being tugged on. He looks over the edge to see that Anne is leaving, and he pounds his fist once more and roars. He's now pissed and feels pretty betrayed. In the words of Freddy Krueger,
"She's mine! Mine! Mine!"
He begins to grab the vine and pull them up. And in a last-ditch effort, Jack looks down and gulps, hoping everything will be alright. Jack and Anne both stare at each other and nod before jumping down into a lake which leads to a stream. They let the current take them for a while before catching a stray branch. Kong is right on their tails. They don't care if they're getting cut up by trees and rocks or whatever they pass. They just want to make it to base, like some sort of sick and twisted version of hide-and-seek. Something in their minds register the wall as the safe point, but Carl has other plans. He has leftover sailors on standby. There's a sailor on the top of the wall keeping watch. He turns away from the jungle and shouts down to the crew that Driscoll is coming and he's got Anne. They open the gates and Jack and Anne run through. Jack tells them to close it, but Denham argues to keep it open. But Jack is adamant and gets them closing the gate. All the commotion attracts the natives to come out of their homes, and when they see the struggle to close the gates, they know what's going on, and they run out and also try to close them. But Kong has arrived. He bangs and knocks at the giant gate, and that shoots many people onto their backs. Kong then begins to push with all his might, and the gate begins to splinter. The gate doors fly open, and we see the great King Kong in all his glory. Natives and sailors flee. Denham gets stricken with fear and orders the sailors to fall back to the beach. Kong makes his way through the village. The native mothers try to protect their children. There's a little native girl crying in fetal position in the middle of the road, and Kong is stomping forward. The mother runs by and grabs her, but not everyone survives. Many huts are stepped on. His attention goes towards natives on a wooden and bamboo construction, aiming, stepping back, and throwing spears and arrows at him. It's like toothpicks to him. He pulls each one out, and they only cause him a slight pinch. One even goes in his gums, and that actually angers Kong since that's a little more painful than in the shoulder, or any other body part that was previously hit. He picks it out, then swings down, knocking many natives off and picking up the native man who took the shot at his jaw. Kong takes him and puts him in his giant mouth. The pressure breaks many of the natives' bones as he screams and squirms in pain. But since Kong isn't a man-eater, he takes him out of his mouth and slams him onto the floor and stomps him into the mud. He then tears up the wooden and bamboo construction and throws the debris at fleeing natives, which take them down. He picks up another piece of wooden debris and uses it as a club, swinging it at people and making them go flying like baseballs. He puts more natives in his mouth and stomps even more people, breaking their spines and suffocating their crushed faces in the dirt. He follows the sailors to the beach, and now there's no turning back. Carl knows it's now or never. The sailors begin shooting at Kong, and Anne flinches a bit and yells, "No!" And Denham also yells no. He puts his hand out and yells, "No! Gas bombs!" Another crate of gas bombs is opened as Kong wastes a couple of sailors trying to tie him down with rope before he's barraged with gas bombs. Carl contributes to the bomb throwing and gasses him right in the face. Kong finally goes down for the count and falls asleep. Denham steps forward and pets his fur. The whole world would pay to see this. An excited smile comes across his face before turning to the crew. "We're millionaires, boys. I'll share it with all of you. Why, in a few months, his name will be up in lights on Broadway. Kong, the eighth wonder of the world!" Now, instead of just cutting to New York, we actually see how they transport Kong to New York. After Carl says his line, we cut to him getting a random sailor to take a picture of him with a still camera he left on the ship. A couple of sailors that aren't fed up with him join him in the pic. A shit-eating grin comes on Carl's face. We fade to a quick montage of them building a raft out of driftwood and debris and bamboo big enough to carry Kong while also staying afloat. They'll also have sailors on the raft with food rations and gas bombs in case he wakes up, though the raft won't be too far behind the hunter. On the ship, Anne and Jack truly reunite, and although she feels bad for Kong, she still loves Jack, and as they kiss and try to calm down from that crazy experience they just had, Jack pops the question. They didn't know each other long, but in that time, he's changed a lot. He never usually showed his emotions and such, and Anne was the only one he felt comfortable showing that side to. He can look her in the eyes and not feel uncomfortable and angry. If she's not the one, he doesn't know who is. Needless to say, she accepts. When they make it back to New York, we get a shot of the hunter going back out to sea after Denham and anyone related to him and Jack have exited. Billy stands there staring at the city as the ship moves further away from it. Englehorn comes up behind him and puts a hand on his shoulder. Billy does not cry, but his eyes are definitely glazed as he asks with his voice shaking, "What was it all for?" Englehorn looks at him and sighs while shrugging. "Can't exactly say myself. There could be numerous reasons. Wealth, notoriety, a twisted sense of heroism and risk-taking. The lust for adventure leads down many paths, and not all of them are pretty, kid." Englehorn walks off, leaving Billy by himself, still staring at the city and sunrise, questioning where he will go from here now that he's experienced the adventure he craved, and was left traumatized. Later, Kong is a big hit, but Broadway is actually out of the question since the theaters don't have any way to get Kong inside, so Denham comes up with a better plan. A couple of weeks later, a fair is in town with rides, games, a circus, etc. But the main attraction is Carl Denham's giant terror gorilla. This is no movie, the posters say. Before the show, we see Jack and Anne enjoying a date at the fair, playing games, winning prizes. We get a shot of Jack walking with an arm around Anne's arm as Anne eats some popcorn and smiles at him. They go on the Ferris wheel, and when on top, they look at the night sky and the Empire State Building, the amazing new building made by men for men. And Jack turns to her and says, "You know, it's really amazing the things we can do." They kiss at the top of the Ferris wheel with the Manhattan skyline behind them. The next day is their wedding. Later that night, it's finally time. Everyone gathers around the huge stage with a giant 25-foot curtain. The people wonder what's behind it. What's Denham up to this time? People are thinking. An old lady is reminded about the advertisement saying this is no movie, and in a bit of comedy she scoffs and says, "Oh, I thought I was going to see something," as she sits down, disappointed. "Well, it better be good," another man says behind her. "I paid $20. Before taking their places, Jack and Anne are greeted by Anne's old acting troupe. There's a heavy-set lady named Ruth, a blonde named Rose, a dark-haired man named Ernest, or Ernie for short, and an older blonde named Faye, played by Jessica Lange. Because although the 70s Kong wasn't critically acclaimed, she's still a living piece of the Kong legacy, and it would be great to have her make a cameo in the film. Not to mention she's named after the original Fay Wray. They talk and joke around a bit, but then the time comes for everyone to stand in their spots. Carl Denham comes out all dressed up with a big top hat and cane and fills the audience in on their story of love, loss, and adventure. He warns the audience members that if they have a heart problem and do not wish to be harmed from terror or amazement, they should leave now and get their money back. He also plays up US morale by stressing the fact that the beast they're about to see was tamed by an American gal. The crowd cheers and whistles and Anne blushes. Denham informs them that he was a king in his world, but now he appears to them in chains, merely a captive. Ladies and gentlemen, look at Kong, the 8th wonder of the world. The curtains go up, and there stands Kong with a metal setup that keeps him in chains with his arms up, staring at the gasping crowd, confused and frightened. As the excitement grows in the room, Kong begins to get more antsy as he begins to tug at his chains lightly. The audience stands back a bit, and Denham notices the tension in the room. He lifts his arm up and goes, Now, folks, there's nothing to fear." He animatedly points his finger at the shackles around Kong's arm. "These shackles are made of chrome steel." He moves over and pets Kong's arm with his white Mickey Mouse-esque glove. Kong actually flinches, and Carl notices this and plays it up for comedy. Carl then reaches out to the audience, pointing towards Jack and Anne. "I'd like to thank the two who, without their help, we wouldn't be here today. A couple that consists of two heroes. First, the man who hunted down the mighty Kong and rescued the girl, Mr. John Driscoll." The spotlight goes on the two, and the people around them turn and clap. Some give Jack a pat on the back. "And who is the girl, you may ask? Why, his future wife. The bravest girl I've ever known. Mrs. Anne Darrow!" Once again, there are claps, and Kong sees Anne, and love shines in his eyes. He hunches his body outwards in a desperate attempt to get her, but he can't. Denham continues. Before we continue with our show, I'd like to take a moment to let the paparazzi take the first ever pictures of the beast. He lies. A group of photographers come out, and before they aim their cameras at Kong, Denham orders them over to Anne and Jack, and they move over there and begin to take many snapshots as the couple tries to pose. Jack kinda gets into it and gives a nice heroic toothy smile, but Anne is feeling a little uncomfortable. Maybe she wasn't cut out for the fame she was seeking. Come on fellas, get a good shot. They're getting married tomorrow. Kong starts growling and tugging more. Be careful, boys. He thinks you're attacking the girl, Denham warns, half seriously, half mockingly. After a few more shots, the paparazzi stops and Anne rubs the spots out of her eyes. One of the photographers speaks up and says, all right, let's see the ape, please. Okay, Denham gives in. Come on up. He looks behind the curtain. Anyone else scheduled for photos? Get on out here. A whole lot more photographers enter from stage left, and when they're given the cue, they begin snapping pictures, and the flash startles Kong as he begins to thrash even harder than before. Anne starts thinking more and more about that day on the island. Plus, she feels bad for the giant gorilla. She tugs at Jack's coat and asks if they could leave, and Jack gives in after a small back and forth of whispers. Kong roars loud as the audience is taken aback and begins clapping, but Denham sees the danger in the situation. Maybe take it easy on the flash photography, boys, he warns nicely. To which one of the photographers snarkily answers, let him roar, it'll make a swell picture. As they keep going, Kong becomes increasingly more furious. His vision is mostly centered on Anne. In slow motion, Kong watches as she walks away, and before she exits the crowd, she turns around and looks at Kong one last time, her beautiful blue connecting with his grizzled brown. That's the final straw. Kong lets out a thunderous roar and pulls with all his might, and the chrome steel chains snap, leaving the shackles looking like mere armbands. The audience gasp and scream as Kong jumps down from his metal prison. Denham turns around and his eyes go wide when he realizes what's happening. Kong jumps down into the audience and begins stomping people. Not because he wants to kill, but because he's confused. He searches for Anne in the sea of people who might as well be ants to him. Any lady with blonde hair is a target. He picks up many blondes, and when he realizes that it's not Anne, he tosses them to the side. Denham is left standing in the wreckage of his own presentation. Kong goes downtown into apartment districts, and passes by an L track and begins destroying it as the L train comes by. The operator of the train sees this giant head in front of him with wild, wide, primal eyes, and pulls on the brakes as hard as he can. The sudden stop makes many passengers fly forward, which injures many of them as they're all piled into each other and crushed into the corner as we see a close-up of a girl screaming into the camera, hands on the side of her head. There are many broken and/or dislocated bones. Kong grabs the L train and pulls it down and begins bashing it. Some people escape out the back. A man climbs down, then his wife or girlfriend puts her hand out and he takes it and helps her down before they begin running. Another woman's legs pop out of the bottom and kick frantically, shoes falling off before she lands and runs. The rest of the passengers inside scream before they're smashed into silence. He then climbs one of the apartment buildings. Inside one of the apartments is a woman packing her bags quickly, obviously planning to flee the city. In the background, Kong peeks in and smashes her window. She obviously screams her head off. Kong holds her upside down as blood-curdling screams come from her, and Kong drops her many feet to her death as sirens blare in the background. The silence and her scream almost sync up. Cars are driving so fast they crash. The military is called in as they begin firing at Kong. Back with Anne and Jack, they're listening to the radio and keeping up on the action. Anne comes to the obvious conclusion that it's her he wants, and in hopes to lessen the destruction, she suggests that she just give herself to him, but Jack cares for her and doesn't want to lose her. They get in an argument before Anne stomps out of their room and heads for the rooftop. She locks the door behind her because she knows Jack is right behind her. Kong jumps from building to building before hearing Anne's voice. Kong follows the call before landing on the roof. They stare at each other before Kong slowly and gently puts Anne in his hand, lifting her up to his eyes as if to be sure that this time it's her. But there's also a look in his eyes that asks, why? He's disappointed that she left him, but also glad to have her back. Jack kicks in the door just in time to see Anne get whisked away. Before Kong jumps, they all just stare at each other. Anne flipping around, staring worriedly at Jack, almost as if she was caught cheating or something. Kong just jumps off with blasts from the military trailing behind him, missing and damaging the windows of buildings. Jack doesn't know what to do. There's only one thing that pops in his mind, and it occurs to him that there's only one person he could go to. He runs down the stairs and takes to the streets. Meanwhile, Kong is avoiding military fire left and right until he loses them and ends up in Central Park. They walk through the zoo, and Kong is saddened seeing all the apes in cages. All the apes marvel at him. Most are restless and shaking the bars. Kong looks down at Anne with a tear coming down his left eye. Anne reaches up and pets under the giant's eye, attempting to wipe the tear away with questionable success. They stare at each other some more until Anne whispers, "Kong, you have to stop." He hears sirens, tank treads, and gunfire in the distance, but doesn't know exactly where they're coming from as he spins around in a paranoid defense mode, letting out angered breaths and grunts, and Anne raises her hand and begins to stroke the fur on his arm, trying to calm him down. "They won't hurt you!" she shouts, but not meanly, more like a mother trying to comfort a child at the doctor's office or something. Kong looks down at her, confused and still agitated. Even he knows what she's saying is ridiculous, but he must hear the rest. "I'll protect you! I could talk to them!" she offers, not quite sure if the plan will work, but this must come to an end. Kong stares at her, and although he respects what she said, he scoffs and moves along out of the zoo. When they exit the zoo, they're fired at some more. Kong feels like he's trapped in a box. Much like on Skull Island, if danger became too much for him and his band, they'd climb to the highest point of the island. That's how he established his home at the top of the mountain. This kind of thought process brings his attention to the tallest building in New York at the time. The recently built wonder that is, the Empire State Building. He rushes there, roaring at civilians and other potential enemies as if telling them to leave him alone. When he gets to the building, he starts from the bottom and climbs higher and higher and higher. Cut to Jack rushing through the city. No taxis let him in, so he ends up picking a lock to a car and stealing it. He can't find who he's looking for. He thinks to himself, if he were this person, where would he be? And then it hits him. Right before Kong and Anne reach the tip of the Empire State Building, Kong sits for rest. The sun begins to rise as the Ferris wheel scene with Jack and Anne is repeated, but this time with Anne and Kong watching the beauty. It seems so different to Kong. Same sun, different world. He finds it gorgeous, and finds her gorgeous. Her blonde hair flows in the wind, but it's cold that high up in nothing but a white dress as Anne begins to shiver and cling to Kong's hand. Kong takes his other hand and lightly covers the rest of her with it like a blanket. She looks up and smiles thankfully. Kong pets her a bit before she readjusts and they look out at the sunrise some more. "It's magnificent," Anne whispers, and Kong lets out a groan of agreement. But their moment is soon broken when a droning sound comes over the horizon, and a squad of biplanes come their way. Kong has a look on his face that's calm, but also says shit's gonna go down. He puts Anne down and climbs to the tip. Anne yells no. Kong looks out to the planes, then down to Anne. And Anne looks up worriedly at him, then Kong focuses back on the approaching planes. Meanwhile, in an abandoned bar, the door is wide open, and only one man sits, serving himself a drink. In the distance, the radio reports of Kong's rampage are still ongoing. It's Denim. He's very down for obvious reasons. This is all his fault, and he knows he's not getting away with it. He knocks back some hard liquor and sulks. That's when Jack enters the bar. "Carl," Jack says. Carl just pours another drink. Jack moves closer until Carl has no choice but to look at him. "What do you want?" He scowls. "He's got Anne, Carl," Jack answers while Denim drinks some more. He chokes out, "Oh, well, isn't that just dandy? I guess we all lost something today, didn't we? The only difference is you're not going to be hauled away to the big house." Jack tries to follow. "What are you talking about?" Carl explodes. "Open your eyes, Jack. You think I'm not going to go down for this? I'm ruined. The next time you see the name Denim, I'll be on death row." "Now, Carl, this isn't the first time you've been threatened with death, and I'll be damned if you, of all people, end up dying in prison. That's too simple for you." Jack moves in closer. "Do you remember how we met each other?" Carl pauses for a second, taking a smaller drink as his hands shake. The memories hit him all at once. "It was 1918. My plane was shot down, and my cameraman died. On the way down, I spun the plane to put out the flames. When I came to, I was in a German prisoner reserve hospital. If I stayed there long, I'd be questioned. If they knew who I was, I'd be killed. I had to go under an assumed name." Jack interrupts. "Yeah, I remember, Marion." Carl looks up at Jack, as Jack looks back at him with heartfelt nostalgia, and Carl is surprised he remembered, though that could just be the alcohol. He continues. When I escaped, I met you in a restaurant. You were deployed not too long ago, and we hit up a conversation about adventure and safaris and cinema. From there, we were partners, and you got all the credit for rescuing me. Jack pushes at his shoulder. That's right, and how many times did your family get a notice that you were dead? More than I can count, Carl chuckles. Right, and that's because when shit got rough, you didn't give up and drown yourself in a bottle. Jack picks up the bottle. You got back up and kept going. You didn't let the world tell you what to do, and that inspired me. Even at your worst, I stuck around because you're the most interesting man I've ever known. Planes are going after Kong now at the top of the Empire State Building, and Anne is up there with him. Instead of pussyfooting around in this pub, we can do something about it. Sure, you're gonna face consequences for this, but would you rather sit here and wallow in your sorrows? Or be a heroic daredevil one last time? What are you suggesting? Carl asks. We go down to the airfield, we get ourselves a biplane, and we take to the skies. Carl wags his finger at him and smiles. Ah, I get where you're going with this. He gets up from the stool. Jack is excited that Carl is actually listening. We brought him here. We should kill that son of a bitch ourselves, Carl exclaims. Jack's mind recoils for a second. Yeah, what? No, you idiot. I'm saying save Kong. Oh, well, we can try, Denham shrugs. That's the spirit, Jack says. Now let's go. Back with Kong on the top of the Empire State Building, the planes make their attack. They pass by and fire, and for the first couple of shots, they miss as Kong swings at them and also misses. Anne watches from below. Another plane passes by, and when Kong swings, he exposes himself, and as he misses, he is shot in the chest. The beast bellows as he looks down and examines his wounds. He sniffs the blood on his fingers, and then looks down at Anne, again leaving him open for another shot that angers him and puts him back in the game. He scrapes one of the planes, and it spirals out. The wind takes control and destroys it. Back with Jack and Carl, they enter the military base and have to sneak around and knock out the guards as a fun chase ensues in a tone along the lines of an Indiana Jones movie or The Rocketeer. Back at the Empire State Building, Kong swats at one plane, but almost trips off. He holds onto the pole and reaches out as far as he could, but misses. The next plane comes by, and Kong spins around the pole like a tree on Skull Island and kicks it down before tripping and having to pull himself back up to the top. Anne climbs up a ladder to get closer to Kong, which only distracts him and leaves him open to more fire. He swings at the planes, then checks on Anne. He gets fired on from every possible angle. The power of love gives him the strength to take one plane and rip its wing off and send it flying down just like that War Eagle back on Skull Island. One of the pilots ejects and goes flying before releasing his parachute. After that feat of strength, Kong slumps. Then in the distance, Driscoll and Denham fly across the bay and under a bridge, rushing to the Empire State Building in a biplane that lovingly has the names Cooper and Schoedsack on the side. As they approach the Empire State Building, they try to send signals to the other biplanes to stop firing, along with Anne, who waves her hands. But the men in the biplanes have their orders, and they are going to see them through. Kong holds on to the tip of the building and stares down at Anne, lightly petting her with his fingers as he slowly dies. In slow motion, we see Denham notice this exchange, how Kong isn't even giving the planes any mind, and as the plane glides by, it strikes his heart in his neck as he grips his shoulder, leans back, almost falls, catches himself on the pole, slumps lower, then bends back, and falls to his death. We never see the impact, but Driscoll sighs and shakes his head as they go in for a landing. The military retrieves Anne. She's very upset when she sees Kong's body laying there motionless, as she begins crying, not just because of his death, but because of the whole experience as people surround her, police, news, paparazzi, military, etc. Jack and her reunite at the bottom of the building and kiss. The police try to create some space from Kong, but some reporters get through and manage to take some pictures. One tries to get on top of Kong and is detained by the police. "Can we get a barrier up over here?" a cop howls. "Stand back, everyone, stand back!" the chief barks. A guy in the crowd takes a picture, turns away and looks down at his camera as he mutters to himself, "What a day. I wake up and there's a monkey on the Empire State Building. Denham comes rushing up through the crowd as he tries to get closer, but the chief stops him. Whoa there, just who do you think you are? Sir, I'm Denham, he states, and a woman next to him goes, Denham? He's the man who captured the beast. The crowd starts to erupt in conversation. Denham has his hands out and the chief puts them in cuffs. Denham looks down solemnly and accepts his fate. Facetiously, the chief says, Well, Denham, the airplane's got him. Denham looks up and shakes his head with a bittersweet smirk. Oh no. I saw it. It wasn't the airplanes. He looks off at Kong's body. It was Beauty killed the beast. The chief orders, Alright, take him away. And Denham is pushed off into the crowd by 2 officers. We pan back and fade to credits.